Good morning, this is Kasturi Day. Today I am going to continue with the Reproduction in Plants chapter according to ICSE syllabus class 8. Today I'll start with the pollination part. So what is pollination? Pollination is a process by which the pollen grains from the anther of a flower are transferred to the stigma on the of the same or another flower. Okay, it may be of the same species. It is generally of the same flower or of another flower of the same plant or of the other plant of the same species. Okay, so pollination is mainly the transfer of the anther to the stigma of the flower. Okay. So pollination is two types, that is natural and other is artificial type. Okay, so first natural type which occurs generally in the nature with the pollinating agents, or it may be when it is a self pollination in the same flower, it occurs automatically. So pollination, this natural method is of two types, that is self-pollination and cross-pollination, whereas artificial is through the technique which is used by man rather, while to improve the quality of the crops or to produce new variety of certain with certain required characteristics. This is a man-made technique, so it's called artificial. Okay. So first let us come to self-pollination. What is self-pollination? Self-pollination is a process of transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or of the another flower of the same plant. Okay, here no external agent is required. Okay. Then pollen grains produced in this case are in small quantities, as there is no wastage of the pollen grains, and flowers are not so attractive. So example are pea, wheat and rice. Whereas in cross-pollination, what happens? Process of this transfer of pollen grains from the anther of the flower to the stigma of a flower of another plant of the same species. Okay. Here external agents are required like wind, water, insects, birds, animals, etc. are required for the cross-pollination. These are known as pollinating agents. Then cross-pollination, in this cross-pollination, pollen grains usually are produced in large quantities because there is a lot of pollen grains which is wasted. Okay. Some are used and some are wasted. So flowers are attractive with colored petals to attract the insects or birds or other animals, okay, for attracting the pollinating agents. An example are mango, apple, sugarcane, etc. Now we come to artificial pollination. In this artificial pollination, I told you that it's a man-made technique. Okay, and the male or the female plants of the same species, in this case first there are some steps rather. So first step is that the male and the female plant of the same species, they are in the same species but maybe of the different it may be in different plants. Okay, and what it is done that they have different desirable characteristics, and from that desirable characteristics, one of the characteristics or two of the characteristics or some characteristics are selected from the male as well as from the female plant. First, their characteristics are selected which are taken as desired characteristics, and then they are cross-pollinated. Then what happens? The stamens of the bisexual flower are removed before the anthers mature. Before the anthers mature, the stamens are removed from them, and the flower with intact gynoecium is covered with a paper or muslin bag so that natural pollination does not occur. Okay, So what happens? First, we have selected certain characteristics from the male as well as from the female flower. Or it may be of the same plant or of different plant. And then what do? Then we remove the anthers. Remove the stamen before the anthers mature, and we covered this gynoecium, that is the pistil of the flower, with a with a paper or muslin bag, so that natural pollination does not occur when it matures. When the stigma of the flower matures, pollen grains from the anther of the selected plant are taken and deposited on the stigma which was covered. The seeds then produced after artificial pollination give rise to a new hybrid variety. Generally, it's better than the parent plants. With this pollination, there is high yielding variety is produced, better qualities of seeds are produced, and it can be the plant which is produced is disease resistant. For example, maize, rice, bajra, sugar, beet, cucumber. Okay. And this process is, you can say this process is named other way as hybridization. Okay. So this is artificial pollination. Next we come to the agents of pollination. I told you during cross pollination in the natural method, there are certain agents required for the pollination like insect, winds, water, animal, etc. So the agents of pollination are the carriers of pollen grains from the anther of the flower, one flower, to the stigma of another flower are known as agents of pollination. So first let us consider the insect pollination. Insect, the agent as pollination. This is known as entomophily. Insect pollination agents. The flower which is pollinated by insects this process is known as entomophily. Okay. The common method, it's a very common method, and it's in this case insects visit the flowers for nectar. Okay. How this is done, this insect pollination or entomophily is done is when the insects visit the flower for nectar, pollen grains get stuck to the body of the insect. And when these insects go and alight on another flower, their pollen grains fall on the stigma of that flower. Okay, and that is how the pollination takes place through insects. In this case, the characteristics of the flowers are large, scented, and they contains nectar to attract the insects. They are generally brightly colored. The pollen grains are usually sticky, so that can easily stuck through the insect's body, and the stigma are sticky, so pollen grains are easily brushed off from the body of the insects. Okay, so these are the characteristics of the flowers of which are pollinated by insects, or the flowers of entomophily. Example, rose, hibiscus, mustard, and the insects which are used for this pollination, or the insects which are the agents of pollination, are generally butterflies, bees, moths, etc. Then we come to wind as the wind as an agent of pollination. So in this process is also known as anemophily, anemophily. So this pollination, in this phase, the pollen grains are blown away by the wind and they get deposited on the stigma of another flower, and this is how the pollination takes place. In this case, the flowers are small and inconspicuous, very small. Okay. And the pollen grains are dry and light, so that they can be easily carried away by the wind. And pollen grains are produced in large quantities, because lots of the pollen grains are wasted. If the wind reduces, the speed of the wind reduces in between, they deposit anywhere else. It can be deposit on the ground, anywhere in the water, whatever it is. It cannot even fall on the stigma. So there should be large amount of pollen grains produced. The styles they should be projecting out. The styles generally project out so that they can catch. The stigma can catch the pollen grains which are being blown away by the wind. So the stigmas are generally large and feathery, okay, so that they can receive the pollen grains easily. Example are maize, wheat, grass, palm, etc. Then we come to water as a pollination agent. This is also known as hydrophily. So in this case, the flower, what happens, they have separate flowers. The male and the female flowers are separate. Okay, so flowers are very light so that they can float on the surface. And when male flowers mature, they get detached from the parent plant and float on the surface of the water. And the floating male flowers, on reaching the female flowers, they deposit the pollen grains into the stigma of the female flowers. Okay, this is how the water acts as an agent of pollination. So what happens in this case, there are two different flowers, that is male and female flowers. The flowers which are they are light and they can float easily on the surface, and when the male flowers, they generally get detached when they are mature and they start floating on the surface of the water, and when they reach the female flower, they deposit their pollen grains into the female flowers, and this is how the pollination takes place. Now the characteristics in this, the flowers characteristics in this case is the stalk of the female flower is long, so stigma above the water of the surface. What happens? The stalk of the female flower is long, and so that the stigma comes out above the surface of the water. And the stigmas are large and feathery so that they can catch the floating pollen grains, and the pollen grains produced are also, in this case also, they are produced in large numbers and they are waterproof. Because if they are drenched with water, then the pollination would not take place properly. So what happens? They are waterproof and they are light so that they can float, and they are produced in large numbers also. For example, Hydrilla and Vallisneria. Then the fourth pollinating agent is animals, or we can call it zoophily. Then the pollen grains, in this case, they are transferred by animals. They can be vertebrates or invertebrate animals. Animals, they reach inside the flowers for nectar, like that of the entomophily also. They reach the flowers for nectar, and in this case, the animal rubs or touches the stamens and they are covered with pollen grains. Their body is covered with pollen grains, and when they reach to other flower, and they brush off these pollen grains onto the stigma, and this is how the pollination takes place. And this case, the characteristics of the flowers are brightly colored, scented, appealing shapes so that they can attract the animals towards themselves. And their shapes and patterns, they are very appealing shapes and patterns. Their stigma, sticky stigma. I mean, the surface of the stigma is sticky. Okay, so that the pollen grains can easily stick to the stigma of the flower, and the pollination takes place. For example, the animals which are involved are bats, hummingbirds, monkeys, and the flowers which are use these animals for pollination is silk, cotton tree, etc. Okay, so let me stop here. I'll continue with the next video, the rest of the chapter. Please go through this. If you like the video, press the like button so that I can produce some more interesting videos for you. And if you have any doubt, please do write in the comment box, or you can write also in my email ID. And if you are a new viewer to my channel or not subscribed yet, please do subscribe to get the notification of my next video. Thank you.